Yeah, okay. I was kind of thinking about Nicolas Cage in that movie Con Air. And the preview, I believe it's his girlfriend that is like the white hair, blue eyes. And in the preview, she's stating that they had waited 8 years for this. And based upon my birth year, that would be like, I think 1972. Nicolas Cage in Con Air. And it seemed to be thinking about the black box and the transponder. And it seemed to be that somehow in my mind, center point energy, representing some idea of region zero, 1 cycle per second in oscillation, with half a cycle above, half a cycle below, or you know what that is at sea level, or deep star 6, seems to be the thing, identifying, you know, a factor of like, deep star 6 as compared to the 6-point star, the Israeli flag. Nicolas Cage in that movie of Con Air, it seemed to be the thing about some connectivity in my mind of like a Safari browser. Because as a matter of fact, Con Air, when they're like, I think they're flying over like Hard Rock Cafe in Las Vegas. I think it's Las Vegas, where the plane actually knocks the arm. I've heard the, you know, where the frets are. Normally a 22 or 24 fret. Electric guitar is, I've heard it referred to both as an arm and a neck. In any case, like the plane in the movie Con Air like knocks that arm off the guitar at the Hard Rock Cafe, and it seemed to be like the Paul McCartney and the Wings thing about that song. It sounds like it's identifying family structure. I think it's Brother Michael, Auntie Jen. Someone's knocking at the door, somebody's ringing the bell, someone's knocking at the door, somebody's ringing the bell, do me a favor, open the door and let them in. I think it's Brother Michael, it's antigen. The thing with this is that the ant, Jen, it's given the pronunciation of like terminology used in oncology involving amyloidosis is what the thing of it is. It sounds like family structure, the way Paul McCartney and the Wings is presenting it as family structure. The thing with this is that, real quick before I get to it, it seemed to be like a black box. Normally it's identified as a transponder. In a Chris Tomlin video, I was actually taken to like an on-site location where a black box is like in the video. And you know, this is like during 1995. When I'm referring to anything on YouTube right now, it's normally like going to be like about a StarGate program or an Abraham Lincoln Night Vision Shadow Government StarGate program, and like being gas and fumigated and all kinds of stuff going on for a 6-month to a 9-month period, looking like possibly even potentially an entire year. Okay, and the thing with this is that and Chris Tomlin, I think is I left my hands, and in that video there's like a black box at that location, and that is one of the locations I was actually taken to during the Stargate program. And when I'm referring to my state is that I am like in a serious, deep, incoherent type of I wouldn't call it, I've been on gurneys and wheelchairs and the James Madison Dolly and strapped to it, and there's like several locations. I'm not even sure if I was actually dressed up as like a Def Leppard rock and roll clown or at the Elvis Presley estate or mansion, but it seemed to be at the gates during what would seem to be like autumn where the leaves were falling. And it seemed to be the deal about, even the thing about the front page of Houston Chronicle Parade magazine of like Marie Osmond, and the similarities of identical to Dandy, but it's kind of like she's wearing like a blue satin shirt, and it's almost somewhere in my mind, almost like something about Nostradamus at the colors of the Houston Police Department and the code blue thing. Yet it's almost like Nostradamus and the blue turbans, about the blue satin turbans, and that's kind of like almost. And ultimately, the thing that we're really getting at is like the Bermuda Triangle on the Atlantic side of the United States. Okay, and ultimately, what I'm really getting at is that on a row, a symmetrical asymmetrical design of a row, a back-to-back design of like one man, executive, Fred Flintstone bedrock type of, accommodations, and the HTTP :// of like symmetrical asymmetrical design is what it's called as a row, okay? And the thing with this is that it seems to be getting to the 5 eccentric triangles of a screensaver. Only 2 of them are eccentric, yet the Bermuda Triangle is eccentric, okay? But it seemed to be, the complete opposite of a telepathic blueprint on the wall of 5 eccentric triangles based upon, only a shelf on the exact opposite side of the wall with 2 triangles under it and, a little small shelf. And I've been getting to, the pi r squared, about the triangle being a 6-point star or deep star 6 or, deal about, night vision or, 6-point star of Israel and the Delta Force and all that stuff. Well, in any case, so like it goes on. And the thing about Nicolas Cage is that in the movie Con Air is that it presents like the black box and the Hard Rock Cafe about that arm getting knocked off, and now it seems to be something about the humerus bone in the forecast of what is some idea of like the humerus bone, some pi r squared factor of like 4 inches of like my humerus bone being taken and removed while I was asleep, and I didn't even have any foreknowledge or in any kind of way agreeing to it other than waking up and realize that had happened. But it's during like a 6 to a 9 month period of some real extreme incoherence, and it seemed to be the thing about like 1995 in the World Trade Center, and it seemed to be really the song about Earth, Wind, and Fire, about being gas and fumigated, and body all never was a cloudy day type of thing, and do you remember? Yeah, in September it seemed to be the thing about the World Trade Center in 1995, because that had actually been really an issue of like Earth, Wind, and Fire, of like fumes, even the thought of like air supply, and a lot going on for a 6 to a 9 month period while I was asleep. And memory had been, really the song itself, and like the question, do you remember? And body up, dancing in September, body up, never was a cloudy day. And the Earth, Wind, and Fire thing about, it seemed to be really the issue about, like even geospatial information technology, or, the deal about air quality going through a circuit and, something like that happening. And a 6-year difference between like September 11th, 1995 to like, 2001. There's a difference of 6, but in any case, so there's something about, the Nicolas Cage thing and Hard Rock Cafe and Paul McCartney and the Wings saying that someone's knocking at the door, someone's ringing the bell, do me a favor, open the door. I think Brother Michael, anyway, he gets to antigen, open the door, and it sounds like he's singing about family structure, yet antigen is like a term used in oncology, okay? And it's hopefully it gets to like amyloidosis, okay? And I'm not real clear because of the information, and I don't want to sit here and act like I'm going to just, figure it out and like guess, but that's a frustrating situation that I realized had taken place, and this is one of the specifics that I'm referring to involving the antigen as far as like, an overabundant amount of white blood cells being produced based upon an external exposure causing the bone marrow to react, in turn the immunoglobulin reacting as like exposure to what, like radiation or chemotherapy, something external. And the thing about antigen, it seemed to be like the way my perception is, and I'm not sure how on track I am with it, but my perception of antigen is like involving the immunoglobulin, but it's identified based upon terminology to only identify an internal causation causing an internal reaction. I've seen information referring to as some foreign factor that presents almost the external almost the external of like what oncology would identify as just exposure to like an external such as chemo or radiation or X-rays and causing the immunoglobulin to produce an overabundant amount of like white blood cells, and it's called amyloidosis. And the thing about the Safari browser, real quick about once again about the hub and hardware of like networking, is it has an IP address like the node does in software. Both hardware and software have an IP address. The hardware side, it like switches and routes and dissipate what's considered traffic to get it to its destination the fastest way. In software, it's called performance monitoring, and a node represents what a hub does, but it doesn't switch and route internally or dissipate what's considered traffic. And whatever's going through a node in software is sometimes considered a hotspot and might require an on-site location, personal human factor participation to resolve the issue, not necessarily a programmed, automated, fail-safe alternative as a safeguard. But yet, once again, like a node in anatomy, it has an IP address, but it doesn't operate quite the same. And what's going through is going to go through it, and no matter what the traffic is the way it's going to be. As compared to like hubbing in hardware, where switching and routing takes place, and it routes, its destination to its fastest, from point A to B to get there. But anyway, in any case, like the Safari browser acts like what amyloidosis causes in anatomy, okay? And it blocks everything and it shuts everything down, and it kind of like overrides and does not allow the ability of functionality and automation to take place. What would be normally an automatic, like the immune system is, it gets to the point that the automatic immune system doing what we normally do becomes congested and blocked, and it's called amyloidosis, an overabundant amount of white blood cells. And the similarities of practical application and principle of Safari browser, based on my experience, is actually presenting, the similarities in practical application. Not that it is of me, but analytically and symbolically. It ultimately acts in pronunciation like almost the same practical application in a different way. In any case, so like, I was thinking about that because ultimately, the thing about, what I'm really getting at is the screensaver on A row, and it seemed to be the essential, the screensaver of the two eccentric triangles bouncing off the side of the monitor, representing the symmetrical asymmetrical design of what is automatically in my mind HTTP : in a back-to-back thing about Austin Powers, Bluebonnet, Imperial Eagle, and the ratio : and the thing with it is that the eccentric triangle seems to be, that's where it's at, is on A row, about the two eccentric triangles, one on each side. Okay, and I'm like doing a telepathic blueprint on a wall because I decided I wasn't going to just sit there and do nothing. I mean, it happened a couple of times, 3 and 4 months at a time, just doing sit-ups and push-ups. I mean all day, studying, linguistic alphanumerics. But I just got really tired of just like looking at the wall and decided to use that shell for the exact opposite as two absolute values of two vertical lines using a legal pad and a pen. And it only got the 5 eccentric triangles overlapping each other, and the exact opposite in analytical and symbolic of like Lockheed Martin, 2 arrows, 4 lines, and 3 intersecting axes. 2 arrows, 4 lines, and 3 intersecting axes, with a 2-3-2 perception of reading the intersecting axes. Yet the 5 eccentric triangles on a wall became the idea of like scale, and the thought of that screensaver of 2 eccentric triangles being like a row of symmetrical asymmetrical design back to back, and it became that 5th dimension up in the air in the beautiful balloon and Orion performance monitoring and the hot air balloons identifying some idea of like a rainbow, nanoluminance, and like a night vision being measured in nanoluminance of like the pastel green of ambient of the 13-band graphic equalizer, and the pastel red likewise of pastel red of impedance of the 13-band graphic equalizer. The thing with this is that the way the blueprint is on the wall, it's like, I mean, just like nothing except beige paint, and just me using a legal pad for like an alignment. And it just seemed that everything had become, I mean, a calculated, invisible, like calculated alignment. And ultimately it was like 5 eccentric triangles. And up towards the ceiling, because it was at a head east point of view, what would normally be to the left side, like on the Pacific side, looking at the United States, but a digitized format of the United States, with some rectangles and some circles, representing some, digitized thing about some conversion between analog and digital, representing the United States. But, the 5 eccentric triangles as a scale, being eccentric is not my thought of really, the Bermuda Triangle, but it is eccentric like that on the Atlantic side. The 5 eccentric triangles in my mind is about the alignment, not necessarily, which the Kremlin and Soviet Union was like another location I was actually taken to, and ultimately it seemed to be the thing about the color of the uniform from like, China and North and South Korea being olive colored, and like a guy in uniform with a guitar. And I'm not sure where I was at when that one particular guy, but he was like on YouTube, and I'm seeing so very much on YouTube about what had happened 25, 30 years ago during what I then did not even consider like a StarGate program, or in any case, but it seemed to be ultimately a military burial determined using an olive-colored uniform representing Mount Olives. I mean, all the way to the Soviet Union. And in a huge room that I was taken to, what seemed to be now about the bleachers there, the stands, the aluminum stands for like used in choir, seemed to be the thing of 6th, 7th, and 8th grade about the aluminum and the color code of like a Holy Sickle and even a spaceship shuttle, and the ratio of the grayscale and the history of the television screen and a silver silk screen and a monochrome that way, getting into the pastels and Technicolor, into the live, living color thing about it. But it seemed to be those stands in choir, seemingly the deal about that one big room, because I was taken there and there was like hardly anyone there. One side there was what would look like, stands or bleachers. But I mean, at the time, no one there. But it's kind of like walking through, it's like an appraisal of a resurrection, and like a full attendance of like the olive-colored uniform, not limited to, and like some serious silence. And really, I don't even, not real sure about something about it, other than, it seemed to be, actual placement somewhere in the Soviet Union and actually inside the Kremlin. I don't like really refer to calling it the Kremlin, other than maybe my thought that it's not necessarily the thought of criminology, but an alignment on a wall, and it seemed to be the 5 eccentric triangles overlapping each other. I mean, like on the row, on the wall, on a row. And reading it is the exact opposite of Lockheed Martin, with the 2 arrows, the 4 lines, and the 3 intersecting axes, with a 2, 3, 2, intersecting point of like just reading it that way. And like an atonement of it would sound to be like, in my mind, a 2, 3, 2 of like Green Acres, da 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 da. Well, the 5 eccentric triangles actually presents, the exact opposite of a 3, 2, 3. What Lockheed Martin reading it would be a 2, 3, 2. At the 5 eccentric triangles, with the 3 lines at an intersecting point, and other factors reading it analytically is the exact opposite of Lockheed Martin of a 2, 3, 2, and the 5 eccentric triangles on the wall being a 3, 2, 3, an area code of Los Angeles, which is also 213, and telepathic brainwaves, and Chevrolet Silverado, and surface to air thing beyond the mistletoe, and well, in any case, so it seemed to be the thing that the up in the air and beautiful balloon became the thought of like excel above the rest, because that was one of the thoughts on my mind about one of the largest shipments in the port of Houston. Was it Chevrolet Geo Prism, and Hyundai Excel. And when I was getting, to the part about even tracing my own work on the wall, and it's not limited to the 5 eccentric triangles, or, the digitized format at a Hetty's point of view, going towards a Hi-Yo silver toilet, and ultimately, the Arctic Circle, and a ball with a string taped to the ceiling, hanging down, in my mind, a starburst of, location of like lasers bouncing off the wall. At one point, would it be like, in my idea of where I put it, like a mid-air, starburst. Pascals of a 247 degree yet 152 degree combine in my mind, okay? Because I was thinking about the international floating account and that cell on A road, the way it's designed. And the thing about the center line of the window and the center line of the mirror at the edge of the shower wall is like a 22.5 deal. And the hockey stick, here's the thing about the hockey stick, is that it's 135 degrees. Memory minus tobacco is 35, okay? And the thing about the 100 Club, it seemed to be involving, Guitar, Airline, Emirates, and Boeing in the Fort Stockton, Texas area. And line 6, V series, electric guitar, combo amp, and some idea like the Permian Basin in Friday Night Lights, because it seemed to be the location of the Kremlin was like an appraisal of a resurrection. I mean, a bunch of gold and white and silver in different locations all over, the entire world about locations. But in any case, with that one room, it seemed to be the thing about something about 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and like, like the 100 Club about the class of like 1981. And it seemed to be almost like the one side having the bleachers there that normally I wouldn't even be on. And all that taking place and seeing something about that, like with William Jefferson Clinton, okay, on like stands of someone I knew in high school, okay, about the choir in blue, not limited to, and a bunch of stuff that ultimately seemed to be about, Friday Night Lights. And the Permian Basin, ultimately, the Permian Basin reflecting some idea of the Bureau of Vital Statistics and the birth certificate footprint on a birth certificate, and a carbon footprint, ultimately being biometrics, ultimately, going beyond biometrics and involving light scribe. The thing with this is that, the color code of the Holy Seagull, the black and white, and the space shuttle, it seems to be that is potentially, the exact ratio of the silver silk screen and monochrome and the history of the television screen. And it seemed to be something about the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade that way. Of the choir using those aluminum stands, being in that room, what seemed to be, in the Soviet Union, and full attendance would seem to be, the olive color representing, Mount Olives in the Transfiguration in the Book of Thessalonians. I mean, it's all I arrive at it now. The 5 eccentric triangles on A row, I mean, isn't automatically my thought of the Kremlin, other than, just a telepathic blueprint on the wall. Not necessarily, crime in my mind, really, truthfully, at all. Although the thought of, like, state, federal, local authorities, the architecture platform, embedded encryption, I mean, it's, involving computer programming and language, and the idea of, like, McDonald's Golden Arches being somewhere in my mind, like being baptized during the gold rush, and on the Wells Fargo stagecoach, and a bunch of stuff ultimately leading to, Calamity Jane in prepaid postage, and the figure 8 of, like, 9-degree right angles and the infinite lines, ultimately getting to the second zero of pi r squared, based upon analytical and symbolic, based upon pronunciation, except from the degree definition of intended use of pi r squared, and a combine of like E equal MC squared, in the way of practical application, applied to linguistic alphanumerics, and the second zero totally developing based upon pronunciation, not necessarily a computed formative computation. In any case, so like it seemed to be that one thing about the eccentric triangle had become some idea of like a 5 eccentric triangles representing Orion performance monitoring on the Pacific side at a phenomenally huger scale than the Bermuda Triangle on the Atlantic side. And it seemed to be the thing about the transponder and center point energy being some idea of like half a cycle above and a half a cycle below, measuring 1 cycle per second in oscillation. In the center line of oscillation at a 90 degree would look like a circle with a dot in it. Yet it seemed to be the Diners Club circle with a vertical line at a 90 degree, and the symbolic representation between the C and the PPIs, and the minimum requirement of 3 simple methods of addition equating to 58. And then the one which had really become a stopping point beyond the thought of like a basic calculators, 0 point E as an error, or what would really look like the symbol on the backside of the US $1 bill, joined together and not having a decimal point, the point 0 point E about it, and it would look like the symbol on the backside of the US $1. In any case, from the alphanumerics of 58, I mean, there's only one more about it being a vertical line, but it's not vertical, because it seemed to be the one and only thing about quantum in Japanese, and a different design E, and the absolute values going through calculus into quantum, and the different design E having the structure in quantum that calculus does not have. And it seemed to be the only two of the structure of Japanese that seemed to be the idea of identifying quantum, and it looked like the exact letters of like Japanese alphabet. According to the information, there's only 22 alphabetical letters in Japanese language. And that seemed to be the thing about, when I was looking for some information about quantum and the different design E, had led to that, and ultimately even, Chevrolet Geoprism and Hyundai Excel, all this information about M is in, when the alphabet is reversed, the intelligence the opposite. M is in, 13 is 14, 14 is 13, M is in, N is M, yet the alphanumerics of 55, heaven and sky. The thing about Geoprism being spelled with a Z, not an S, prism, Geoprism is Geoprison, is 109, is 110, governor is president, or Los Angeles is president. The alphanumerics of 247, which is like, in my mind, the Southwest Freeway in the Houston area, and, the Southwestern Bell thing about Code Blue. The United States Supreme Court Southwest Court Reporter is something that I spent like a lot of time reading a whole bunch of case about de facto. The thing about Vantage Love 30, it got to the point that realizing something about intellectual property, some easement as de facto, presenting what lifespan means, whether appreciation or depreciation, settlement or annuity. And it became the issue really in my mind between the monetary domestic aggregates of neighborhoods and being some idea of suppression and loss prevention, and in the bank, and what the endorsement is or is not in the way of de facto, or what seemed to be even the thought of like incorporation being manufactured based upon economics providing gross national product in a specific area of only what availability means, or somewhere in manufacturing incorporation that way. And that really even seems to be the thing about the 240% interest on a pawn ticket in a pawn shop, experiencing a vice president network, and the only thing about 240% ultimately gets to the minimum of appliances involving normally a stationary engineer, but is it like a mandatory requirement, but normally a minimum of 240 volts, normally of appliances of a commercial venue of living quarters that's not affected by television programming or deed restrictions or any means of litigation using de facto and res habeas corpus as a deed restriction. Well, anyway, so like it seemed to be that the 5 eccentric triangles had ultimately got to the thought of Orion performance monitoring and up in the air in a beautiful balloon in the book cover, Orion Performance Monitoring, and Chevrolet GeoPrism. And GeoPrism is GeoPrison, being alphanumeric 247, and ultimately the United States Secretary Robert E. Rubin. And the thing about Hyundai Excel above the rest seems to be, about the 5 eccentric triangles, what would represent, really, the Bermuda Triangle isn't really my although it was a thought of mine, but it's because it was eccentric. It wasn't immediately the 2 eccentric triangles bouncing off like each side of the monitor as a asymmetrical design of ARO. It is now automatically, the design of state, federal, local authority, structure on County Road 45 in Angleton, Texas, being symmetrical about HTTP : double force slash, and, Austin Powers, Blue Bonnet, and Paralegal. Well, anyway, it seemed to be like all this information has led to, about even, the FBI location 1 Justice Park being some idea of a converting factor of like Orion becoming Arion, and some idea of going through a circuit somewhere in my mind being itemized as human capital on the expenditure side, and going through what is normally identified as a Bluebird bus and placed on an Airbus H-160, and there were 2, and I don't remember being on a blue one, but it was there. And when I'm talking about all this stuff on my channel at WadeASVPriddy at YouTube.com, I'm referring to predominantly what I did not even consider a StarGate program at the time. I knew I'd seen, certain, individuals that were like, movie stars and entertainers, and, automatically, that wasn't like really anything that I didn't like already know anyway. It's just that I didn't consider the StarGate program. Yeah, I had the books, okay, and it seemed to be ultimately originating, really, at the time of birth, really, but even more so in 1992, June 14th, 1992, the baptism at the Mormon Church, becoming some idea of Six Flags baptism, and now it seems to be like real quick about, is referred to like a scooter that has a similarity, but it seemed to be, there's one particular person in the Austin Powers movie, and she has the similarities. Well, here it is again, and this person, she is like LaSix corrective eye surgery, but in the Austin Powers movie, the person I'm referring to right here now is like blue eyes. The one in the Austin Powers movie is in a wheelbarrow for a few seconds, and if my memory serves me correctly, her eyes are green. The thing with this is that it seemed to be the thing about Astroworld turning into Six Flags and the Barrel of Fun, about it spinning in the centrifugal force, keeping a person stationary up against the wall based upon centrifugal force as it spins as the floor drops. Well, anyway, Astroworld turned into Six Flags, and it was either a 6-month or a 6-year later. It moved to like San Antonio, considered to be, like a Six Flags Fiesta, Texas, in San Antonio, Texas. And all this information seemed to be linking like the EBT in the Alamo to like Quantum and Diners Club. And the 100 Club, it seemed to be, some idea of, alphanumeric linguistics that's presenting, the supplemental security as supplementary 310 in the area code of San Antonio of 210. And it's like several issues involving like the 100 Club in alphanumerics in the way it's perceived as applied to the area code 210 becoming 310, and like the EBT of electronics benefits transfer. And I thought of Remember the Alamo, it's kind of like I had heard the right up your alley thing. The thing about, like the misappropriation of allocation and a right up your alley thing has become the idea of like, the colon double forward slash has a ratio double forward slash. It's not necessarily my thought of a treasure hunt. But the thought is like in my mind about something in a way that seemed to be involving supplemental security income that represents, somewhere the ERISA statute and the IRA and the color code of the Air Force One of the President of the United States. and memory minus the fact of being 35 and like jet, and all the information it seemed to be about referring to an air quality as incoherence. The thing of it is that it's really beyond the thought of incoherence. I don't really like calling it unconscious. I really don't like calling it really a military ability determinant based upon the thought of like to the fullest extent of meaning and content and value. But in any case, it seems to be something about the mind's eye to an extent of like wondering like the mind's eye is obviously the reality of like what I'm talking about of military ability determinant, and my mind's eye seems to be like several locations. Okay. In any case, so like this, I'm predominantly talking about a time of incoherence, referring to like air raids while I'm asleep, going through a circuit at different locations inside, and taking, like around at different locations, all over the entire world, including, like Europe and Egypt, involving what seems to be now more and more like a whole bunch of stuff that's taking place even before like 1992, of, certain factors even involved before I even knew or realized. But without a doubt, I had realized that going inside, going through a circuit on its end, I had to extend it really beyond 16 years. Now this is the year 2025, really beginning in like December of 1993, even more so 94, 95, and 96 were the first three hardest of, going through the circuit that I didn't even consider a StarGate program. But ultimately, it got to like several factors that, at different locations, it seemed to be distinct in difference whether if the State of the Union address is only way international and a difference of 192 as compared to 181. It seemed to be the only difference of 11 and 7-Eleven and like K television. So the thing with this is like 181. Okay, what is it? 192 is like an 8. It's like wait a minute, 100. Wait a minute, let me think about this. 181 and 9. I think it's 11 anyway. 181 and 9 is like 181, 2. Wait a minute, 192. Anyway, yeah, it's 11. 181 and 11 is like 192. Okay, but anyway, it seems to be the difference of 11. And what, old thing heaven for 7-Eleven is, like K television, ultimately even, Fox 29 News and W television in like, Philadelphia. The thing about, State of the Union address is the alphanumerics of 192, the same as the one word in the book of Thessalonians, the Transfiguration, about being on Mount Olives after the third day and resurrecting, and the Lord Jesus Christ going to Mount Olives, a plateau, and ascending and re-entering heaven, ascending into the sky. And it seemed to be, the distinction difference between the State of the Union address and Way International had really got to a point. But anyway, it seemed to be like a lot of memory had been reactivated, after the fact, 25, 30 years later, somewhere around like, close to like when my father had passed away in May of 2018, I'd really recognize, Microsoft presenting screensavers over a period of years, and it seemed to be, a sequencing of different screensavers for about maybe a 4-week, maybe a 6-week period, and then, maybe months later, 6 to 8, maybe 9 months later, maybe if not an entire year, it would like go through using the same screensavers, and that went on for like 4 or 5 years, before, my father passed away, like May of 2018. I'd already been through the circuit, and like a lot going on, and not even thinking about, the StarGate program. It was only when memory minus the fact up became 35 and Austin Powers Blue Bonnet and Paralegal. And the thing about, the blue and purple bird of Israel, yet, the state flower for like Texas is the blue bonnet. And the Imperial Eagle presents, the gold and purple, like Notre Dame. And it seemed to be the connectivity of Notre Dame in color code and principle of like what seems to be the history of the U.S. dollar and the secrets of the temple, how the Federal Reserve runs the country, going all the way to like South America as Latin. Latin, I'd refer to the dollar as being 62 and Latin being 62. It's only because I know that about the secrets of the temple, and automatically I associated Latin as being 62. Some idea. But anyway, what is Latin? What 12, 13, 33, 42? It's like 56, like a drum, or like paper made 56 to 10. And the one cycle of frequency, one cycle being measured in oscillation, one cycle per second being measured in oscillation. And it seemed to be the only thing about Latin terminology and the letter in that one cycle half above and below that seems to be the converting factor of like what de facto is in a way that's normally not even suggested is like LULAC, Latin Urban League of American Citizens, or the AC representing some idea of alternating current. The AC, I'd refer to it as some other idea of like, a bunch of rectangles being like the color code of like a United States codes annotated, or the exact opposite of AC being CA or codes annotated. Latin Urban League normally doesn't identify the one cycle over the letter N as some idea of representing the equator, or any idea of the delta force representing some idea of something. I'm not sure if it would be considered a grid of like redundant frequency involving neighborhoods, or limited to maybe the idea of what a boycott and embargo would only mean of maritime law that way. I mean, the way I'm hearing it, it's kind of like, you gotta be kidding me. I mean, isn't there anything else better to kind of hear at a subconscious level? Think about Paraland, okay, and all this, the way I've been really hearing it is sometimes far beyond like not cool. It's kind of like, I have better things to do than, have a feeling of like, hey, it's like not cool having to listen to something that way at a subconscious level. It's like really not really cool about being at a location. It seems to be some idea like only litigation de facto origin habeas corpus, only trying to find some idea of legal medias like auditing, and not the issue of post-production. I mean, it seems to be like there's got to be better things to do than try and find some idea of like a Roe v. Wade situation in Paraland, Texas, just because my name is Wade, okay? There's some idea like a loss prevention and suppression is the idea of the idea of like staying in the bank, or some idea of a description in the Six of the Temple, how the Federal Reserve runs the country, and at a form of notion, someone claimed that a carbon footprint and absentee voting is like having fair use of a birth certificate and citizenship, and don't even have an idea that their birth certificate had become some idea of non-negotiable and non-transferable itemization, as some idea of like having fair use of intellectual property, or borrower's terminology suggesting that trade and energy would almost be like the idea of like not knowing that bullion had become an issue. Seemingly Centerpoint Energy had presented some idea that it become like region zero, and something represented the symbolic representation on the backside of the US $1 of like one cycle, half above and below, at a 9-degree, with the center line of oscillation looking like a circle with a dot on a halo schematic side of the symbolic representation could be the C and the PTIS on the backside of the US $1. Yet Diners Club at a 90, and the center point being the fact of a 90-degree, it seemed to be involving the symbolic representation of Diners Club, and some idea that symbolic representation being 58, being 59 at a 90-degree would normally be vertical. At a 90-degree, it still presents the practical application of the EE that way. What is on a calculator, that anything beyond the program software or an error will present the EE, like on a basic calculator, whether beyond or an error, it will show the 0 point E, but on a calculator like Texas Instruments involving the limit of like calculus or any tech math associated with it. The EE will pop up, and it seems to be the McDonald's Golden Arches that way. The EE in Texas Instruments that way. Even Sarbanes and Oxley Financial Instruments of SOX compliance, and some idea of the one cycle becoming a practical application of being side by side, and becoming the idea of this fish swimming upstream as a projected estimate, as relation in architecture and platform of computer programming and language, including some idea of embedding encryption, getting above the equator at a degree level reputable standards of considerable participation, and the way I see the McDonald's Golden Arches really being about some idea of like what it is to be in a neighborhood, and some idea of like a grid representing something of Latin America. Although Brazoria is 90, I'm not a Colombian. Although Brazoria is 90, and one person being a Colombian is 90, and the thing about a carbon footprint or biometrics being some idea of a carbon footprint or absentee voting beyond the Bureau of Statistics, it seems to be whether or not the American Free Trade Act is presenting energy trading that seems to be ultimately getting to Mercedes-Benz introducing a smart car, the Smart for Two, and Centerpoint Energy, the smart meter, and a smart car that Mercedes had distributed for quite some time. I think it's coming back, and Mercedes is maybe particularly going to still be a distributor and sells for like the smart car. But I mean, the Smart for Two also ultimately included the Scion IQ and the Saturn Sky, and ultimately even the Lexus LFSA. There's some idea of Chuck Woolery and the Love Connection be back in 2 and 2. And ultimately it seemed to be the thing about the 2 and 2 being like the 2 and 2 being the Better Business Bureau 222 of a bird bat baptism. All that information right there seemed to be, I mean, the Psychic Warrior, America's foremost psychic spy, and the cover up a bird bath of the top secret, a top secret bird bath, the unidentified flying bird bath, Better Business Bureau bird bath baptism. Some identified UFO sighting, case presence and annotation in during baptism, getting baptized, during the gold rush on the Wells Fargo stagecoach on Flag Day, June 14, 1992. This ultimately got to some connectivity between Astroworld turning to Six Flags and moving to San Antonio, considered to be Fiesta, Texas, in San Antonio, Texas. And all this information seemed to be that the eccentric triangles and the screensaver and all that information, okay? I mean, it just goes on and on about, the connectivity. And it's already going on 47 minutes, and I'm already feeling like taking a break, but it seemed to be that transponder issue of like Nicolas Cage's movie, and the connectivity, Paul McCartney and the Wings, and that guitar like the Hard Rock Cafe being knocked off by the airplane and crashing in the desert, and ultimately the issue of a transponder. And it seemed to be like a Chris Thomas song, I Lift My Hands. And even the location that I was taken to that video where the black box is, and somewhere in my mind it seemed to be something about a transponder, or even Centerpoint Energy being used as a black box, as a transponder. I even called Centerpoint because I'd asked, what the capabilities of the smart meter is. I mean, does it like communicate and code anything other than, kilowatts per hour? Obviously, sequencing is part of, obviously what I see as a smart meter. And there had been issues of what access had ultimately been being presented within signal strength, or what home of the range means to, a vice president network, because ultimately it had gotten to whether or not if trade and energy had become an issue of North American Free Trade Act, or some idea of the Eurodollar representing some idea of Centerpoint Energy over like half a cycle above, one cycle a frequency, a half above and below the center line of oscillation at a 90 degree, presenting some idea of a circle with a dot in it. Ultimately, even like the Statue of Liberty, 7-point crown of the Statue of Liberty, or telepathic TP, and the cone heads of Saturday Night Live, But it seemed to be that ultimately, even the pylon. In any case, so it seemed to be like ultimately, in addition to the Statue of Liberty, don't be fooled by imitations of the Swiss Klondike bar. It seemed to be, the idea something of Colombia that way, that, you know, presents what would be some people's thought of the Statue of Liberty, but I mean really isn't. And somewhere in my mind, the hockey stick and the Swiss Klondike bar and the hockey puck, it presents somewhere in my mind, you know, the Swiss Klondike bar as, you know, something about, you know, Geneva, Switzerland, and really kind of not the Statue of Liberty, yet Colombia, but not the Statue of Liberty, or like Europe, or, you know, Region 2, or the Euro dollar. Really seems to be the situation. I mean, like right now, and the hockey stick being 135 degrees, divided by 22.5 is 6. And the thing about, you know, a vice president network and the numeric value of 6 being spelled out, SIX being 52, or a VPN, ultimately getting to a vice president network. Or, you know, what seemed to be the deal about the American Express Bluebird card, or, you know, like an Aerosmith song, living on edge seemed to be the thing about the gold edge, or ethnic background of the 15-digit card of a prepaid card, American Express Bluebird card. And it seemed to be like a vice president network and financial institutions is presenting some issue, like even, you know, me using my card as some like mood altering experience with a bunch of, you know, some idea like, you know, me, you know, being some idea like, you know, some American citizen and international citizenship over having the card, or, you know, a vice president network claiming some FDIC claim and not saying or admitting like one thing about everything I'm talking about on YouTube. Is me straight up talking to like a bunch of operators, just really presenting like a whole bunch of nothing as mood altering, like what are you even answering the phone for? And it seemed to be a vice president network, you know, presenting some idea of like, you know, some idea of having fair use of a birth certificate as a carbon footprint, or intellectual duration that seemed to be the only idea of what meaning and value and content would only mean is a carbon footprint, or some easement of intellectual property that would only suggest maybe only what having fair use, but not a breach of copyright, not infringement, not claiming, you know, ownership of the rights, based upon availability. And that's normally the way it is in economics, providing what availability means. It seems to be like, you know, financial institutions, and like even Pennzoil are presenting some idea of, you know, me, you know, getting the international citizenship, you know, in my life, you know, as compared to some idea of like what, you know, having fair use only means is like, you know, presidents and governors presenting some, you know, parental guidance and some issue of like, you know, community supervision, you know, or some idea of like, you know, potentially, you know, claiming some idea of authenticity isn't necessarily the idea or the question of, you know, auditing legal media. Yet it presents, you know, hey, like, is there like anything really good about, you know, it's still like I'm looking like at everything about it, and not one word from, I mean, not one person about it, okay, and you know, presenting a whole bunch of silence about me just using my American Express Bluebird card. It's a 15-digit card. It's almost like, you know, some idea like someone claiming that like censorship is claimed that hey, maybe someone else is like wanting to be the American, and, you know, some idea of like a North American Free Trade Act is providing, you know, favoritism in the form of political science, and some idea that only having fair use is distinguishable of like even family law making a grade beyond business law, or some PTA idea of like community supervision just because maybe I'm just like on YouTube saying what it is I have to say, or some, you know, presidents and governors providing some idea of, you know, not necessarily the idea of immigration and custom enforcement being excused of, you know, a breach of a U.S. patent. And what a patent pending is or is not, I mean, in human capital, and it seems to be really whether or not, if a deed restriction is all about loss prevention in the form of like maybe some idea of maybe capturing the moment and getting the human capital into, you know, something beyond a method of banking, and like I'm so like learn as to go. It's kind of like as humiliating as it may seem, you know, not being naive to really the situation. It's like, you know, hey, and finding somewhere of like I mean, it's not that I plan like any idea of like approval in this way. Although, you know, I'm using YouTube.com about, you know, being, you know, all I can be beyond, you know, the reserve. The thing with this is that ultimately, a commercial venue of living quarter, it's not a question of deed restrictions or television programming or K-television presenting some idea as suppression or loss prevention and keeping someone in the bank, leaving the bank is seemingly being, a bunch of already crap of it, like a circuit, presenting what I'm talking about, involving like air raids and ultimately, military bill of deterrent over, a color code somewhere, including in the Orient and the blue buildings that seem to be in China. Yet the color of the uniform, I'm assuming it was more so Korea, and Korean being alphanumeric 64, and ACTP and American and Israel that way. Of a color code, the olive colored uniform. Similarly, I'm thinking maybe all three of like North and South of Korea and China, since the blue buildings of, that was actually some idea in my mind, somehow even a Lakewood pathway. Including, a place I was taken to in the blue buildings that you'll see Kim Un and even Trump walking, what seemed to be, some idea of the pathway. And on, to the Soviet Union and the Kremlin, and a whole bunch of, gold and white, ultimately leading to that big room, that was predominantly empty, what seemed to be later, what would be like during 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, the aluminum stands for, like, used for a choir. Except a little bit more, like portable stands, and like full tents of the uniform of a color, like an appraisal of a resurrection. I mean, in the mind's eye and like in the spirit. I mean, for real. And it seemed to be like a Soviet Union, like a movie, a whole bunch of serious silence, before and during. Yeah, I mean, it was like a really not cool. Remembering anything about it was like 25, 30 year period later about a screensaver that reactivated my memory, and then I'd realized for the first time that Europe's most wealthiest museum, being, the charcoal gray, the dark kind of gray, and like the white marble floor of like a checkerboard and the white statues, and I'm thinking, hey, that looks like a funeral home, a museum for like dead people, and I realized I had been taken there is what the deal is, and I predominantly only remember the hallway, but I mean that's when I really knew for the first time that memory had been a big deal, and openly a lot of videos of a bunch of people in like Egypt and certain other locations standing real still, like the deal about maybe the thought of maybe the Oscar award, or how mechanically, normally a deed restriction doesn't identify the Oscar award as some idea of preservation, or some museum for like dead people, right? Mechanically, huh? Amazing. The thing with this is that ultimately, a deed restriction, with what television programming presents, doesn't seem to be, so incriminating, having a carbonated drink like Dr. Pepper, or the DR being a deed restriction, or ultimately even a mechanics lane, or ultimately, the 23 ingredients being some idea of the additives, preservatives, and byproducts, and 23 being some idea of 20 being 107, or military, or quantum, or diners club, and the county road I'm on now, which is actually 3611 Mona Street, previously in the beginning, County Road 107C and Route 1, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, back in 1978 and 79, Route 1, Box 1104, which is now 3611 Mona Street, and still a County Road 107. The thing about this neighborhood, I think there's 6, 7, maybe 8 County Road 107s, and it seemed to be the issue that I realized about whether if it's, County Road 107G, and I think it was like alternating between County Road 100G and 107H, and it presents the silence and pronunciation, like in light, the GH is like silence, and it seemed to be the thing about right here, this LaSix laser corrective eye surgery, something about even this neighborhood, because I believe if my memory serves me correctly, it's not like, I mean like at all, but I think it's something about this neighborhood being every county road 107, and alternating the deal about 107G and 107H, presenting the silence and like light. This one person right here, for LaSix laser corrective eye surgery, okay, automatically the coupon in God's angel, okay. The G and the H of the way this neighborhood is designed, there seemed to be knowing something about it being County Road 107C when I first moved here in 1978 December, and being C for like, I mean, you know, a long time, years, and realizing that it changed and it was only 107. And it only been several times I went through this neighborhood, and I think I remember seeing the difference of alternating between the G and the H of 107G and 107H, which in pronunciation with light, it seemed to be this one coupon, and right now it seemed to be LaSix laser corrective eye surgery in a building on the west side of Houston, involving, you know, during when I was going through the StarGate program, was actually the place I actually was taken to. I didn't even know where I was at, but I knew that area anyway because I was going to the Art Institute of Houston, studying, you know, audio production and television production and music video business, and previously at the Center for Advanced Legal Studies of, like, you know, studying to be a paralegal, and completed really 9 courses and on my 10th course. I mean, it's like a short deal, but I mean, I spent like a lot of time before, during, and after class, and even more than I even expected, you know, years later, in the law library quite a bit. In any case, so like, spent a lot of time with it. So like, anyway, so it seemed to be something about the G and H presenting the silence, and somewhere in my mind, that's exactly what she's doing. Like right now, a bunch of serious silence that I'm almost finding it hard to believe that anyone could, you know, be quiet that like long, right? There seemed to be something in my perception. And my question is that really something about 1965? I'm thinking that, you know, this is automatically, you know, the MSN and the sky and heaven thing about alphanumerics and linguistics, and like linguistic alphanumerics, and right now it seems to be the thing about LaSix laser corrective eye surgery, and the coupon being like God's angel. And in the beginning, what's the Word? The Word was God, and the Word is God, and God said, "Let there be light." Okay, so like this is where I'm at with, like, I mean, my location, and realizing something about, you know, the G and H of like this neighborhood, every county road. I think there's 7 or 8, maybe 9, 107s in this particular neighborhood, and it seemed to be the alternating factor between the 107G and H that presents the silence in the word light, and that's actually 7 and 8 being the alphanumerics, 15 and the letter O. Okay, like G is the 7th letter, and H is the 8th, and 7 and 8 is like 15. Okay, this is almost like an automatic. A picture is a picture. Okay, and God's angel in the coupon about a current resident, and now it seems to be, you know, the memory about, you know, this particular neighborhood, and it's not limited to this neighborhood, but I mean all over the entire Houston, Texas area, and based upon my experience, I mean various places around Texas and even Louisiana, about street signs being switched and changed. I mean, in progress. Yeah, so it seemed to be something about, you know, in the beginning was the Word was God, and the Word is God, and then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and there is light, and God saw that the light is good. Yes, it is. In any case, so like, that seemed to be like something I actually just realized within the last month, that this county road had an alternating issue between 107G and 107H. And the thing about, when I was at the age of 15, as a pitcher on the Padres, and some idea, I didn't even know that a laser had been involved with a pitching injury. And it was only from 1979 all the way to the year 2022. The one and only other time, the second time, I was under my carport and getting burned with like a laser, and leaving an impression, what would normally be like a TV test, you know, going through the 12 public grades of education, the impression of what would normally be like sets of 2 of a TV test. allegedly burned me on my left calf muscle and gave that impression. Yet, and likewise, the same day and later, the pain in my shoulder of what seemed to be a pitching injury that I thought was only related to me trying to pitch and throw the baseball as hard as possibly, and I normally average around 87 miles per hour. It's normally, on my better days, is really my peaking as a pitcher. Around 87 miles is a consistent average. But anyway, I had a pinch injury, and I thought it was just, me just tired and practicing all the time, and it seemed like tendons and ligaments and cartilage had tore. And I wasn't able to pitch for the remainder of the season. And at the time, I was in high school playing junior varsity and little league. Yet, I couldn't pitch for the remainder of the season, and in between, doing that both, and ultimately, after 3 months on JV, you're getting pulled up to varsity. All that was going on when I was at the age of 15, and transitioning, and now it seemed to be something about the American Legion baseball, and the AL being the LA and linguistic alphanumerics involving baseball in Los Angeles, even the California Angels linking American Legion baseball predominantly at the summer after high school baseball, and the initials and the acronyms, and Los Angeles and linguistic alphanumerics, and the California Angels and Nolan Ryan. All this connectivity, and even the Blue Angels are the Air Force. Even the blue buildings, all the way to the Korean. Something about Code Blue and United States Supreme Court Southwest Court Reporter. Because here's the thing, is that I know I'm covering a whole bunch of information, and actually what seemed to be accomplishing a point, and it sounds like it's been accomplished as that's what all that seems to be in my life, right? But so ultimately, it has gotten to some idea in my mind of 5 eccentric triangles representing the Los Angeles area code 323, and all this information with Pearland, and the idea of the 3 years of intermediate school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade during the 1976 200-year celebration of America has ultimately got to even television programming in the Permian Basin of Fort Stockton, Texas, and the color codes of the rainbow. Orion performance monitoring becoming, the deal about, geoprism is geoprison, and the alphanumerics is 247. 109 is 110, governor is president, Los Angeles is president, and the nanoluminance of a rainbow being some idea of night vision being measured in nanoluminance, and Abraham Lincoln night vision shuttle government StarGate program. But anyway, it's already gone on an hour and 8 minutes and 15 seconds. But it's kind of right now. I'm kind of there's a thing I was actually going to refer to Nicolas Cage in the movie Con Air, and I think it's his girlfriend in the movie Con Air. She's blonde hair and blue eyes, and states that they had waited 8 years for something to take place. And the whole point of the movie is that Nicolas Cage got in an argument over his girlfriend and wound up in prison. Okay. The thing with this is that during that time there had been the idea of the plane knocking the arm off the guitar. In my mind, Fort Stockton, Texas, is like the summit meetings involving Boeing, Emirates, and Qatar Airlines, and a bunch of information involving the birth certificate, the carbon footprint, the plateau at that location, and an identical twin rainbow. The one commercial on, okay, here's the thing, okay, is that there's a commercial of what is normally associated with the 12-step program, or what you would see on Cops or City Under Siege. And the one commercial that seems to be the only thing that really matters about the song and all the connectivity, what I'm talking about, is the guy is walking in circles. He's either in an apartment or he's his home. And he's referring to, using, a controlled issue, okay? And he states that I use this so I can work longer hours, so I can make more money, so I can get more. And it's a never-ending cycle, and like he starts walking in circles and progressively speeds up, and everything's like, you know, disappearing around him and all the furniture. And then that song comes on at the end. I have always been chasing rainbows, waiting for little bluebirds. And I'm actually trying to remember the last 2 or 3 words. But I mean, it seemed to be the thing about the American Express and the Bluebird and the Bluebird bus. And the transition of like, you know, some idea of like being itemized as human capital on the expenditure side and placed on the Airbus H-160. And somehow getting to the being venue in Geneva, Switzerland, of human civil rights becoming the idea of human capital beyond a method of banking, a principle of like the 12 Federal Reserve Banks. And I'm not sure if that's actually involving some idea of a Securities Exchange Commission based upon the idea of an endorsement, or some idea of an entrance exam of the StarGate program as a, you know, projected estimate, you know, as what a method of banking had been suggested as, you know, intellectual property as projected estimate of being used in the StarGate program. But it seemed to be the thing about Geneva, Switzerland, and the being venue not having the G in the word being. That G combined with the W, and it seemed to be the 23 of Dr. Pepper, the 23 ingredients, and the 23-year anniversary celebration that puts the W and the G of Fantasy Love 30, the 30 being the W and the G being 23 and 7 being 30, or Secret de facto, and applied to the Boolean chart being the blue wing of the Blue Angels and the blue wing of the White House. You've heard it referred to the West Wing. The blue wing is really like the California Angels, and you know, the Blue Angels of the Air Force. In the prefix of the White House and the color code of the Air Force One and the 1040 EZ, the pastel blue and the white, which seemed to be the one and only year of the 1995 of the Midnight Blue, identifying the Air Force One as an acronym of like, you know, Foreign Bureau Intelligence, or the one and only year it seemed to be of 1995 in the World Trade Center, identifying the color code of the Midnight Blue of uniform of government. And a lot of stuff that I'm referring to, like 1994, 95, and 96, and a difference of 6 between what, you know, it seemed to be, you know, the World Trade Center of like September 11th, 1995, and a 6-year duration to like the year 2021, and all the African 6 in that way, in every possible way, including the Vice President network. In any case, so like, you know, it seemed to be that this one particular person, it's like, yes, yeah, I need to see more of you for real. And the thing with this is that there's a person in the wheelbarrow in the Austin Powers movie. And the thing about wheelbarrow is that it's 109 like Los Angeles. It is an Austin Powers movie. And the similarities of this coupon, this person here, she is, the similarity of the person in the movie in the wheelbarrow for a few seconds in Austin Powers. And the one in the Austin Powers movie seemed to be, you know, the green eyes. If my memory serves me correctly, the similarities of the parents, I mean, are unreal. I mean, so similar. I mean, telling the difference, I mean, over a few seconds. Yet, I mean, that's just the one scene for a few seconds involving a wheelbarrow being alphanumerics of 109. And, you know, like a Kobe ID 19 being the S being the 19th letter, or the wheel becoming wheels, and the barrel being barrels, and the SS, the ISS, and the SSI of a misappropriation allocation to the Mississippi. And it seemed to be the thing about the wheelbarrows becoming the alphanumerics of 147, like Robert E. Rubin, the United States Secretary of Treasury, a telepathic judge. United States Secretary of Treasury, Robert E. Rubin, seemed to be the big deal when the Secret of the Temple Health Reserve runs the country, and Paul Volcker being called, Ronald Reagan calling Paul Volcker from the New York Federal Reserve Bank, President Paul Volcker calling him to Washington, D.C., and I think he was placed as Secretary of Treasury or a special economics advisor, and I'm not sure if it was like in coordination with doing both. But Robert E. Rubin seemed to be more so identifying what would be more so of the endorsement and the name as a current event, a current affair, more so than maybe Paul Volcker maybe identifying the New York Federal Reserve Banks and the U.S. dollar more so, seemingly linking Latin America to the information involving that one cycle per second in oscillation on the Latin letter N, and it seemed to be that it's applied to the acronym of OSHA. And the thing about, it seemed to be at the front lines of the beachfront and a vice president network of immigration, custom enforcement, and importing and exporting, presenting maritime law. I mean, that way, with Latin terminology, and it seemed to be that one biblical scripture, Jesus said he knew for the foundations of the earth. And what concrete is, with sand, I mean, everyone knows that sand is mixed with like concrete or like, and water and certain other factors, but it seemed to be the thing about sand software and that fact and that letter N of like Latin terminology applied to the acronym OSHA, Occupational Safety Health Administration, and it becoming in pronunciation ocean. And once again, it seemed to be, I mean, the Hillsong song of Australia, Ocean's Deep, where feet may fail, and it seemed to be the real big deal that slid through my mind of maritime law involving the birth certificate as a carbon footprint, having fair use of intellectual property, not breaching copyright, yet not claiming ownership of the rights, seemed to be the thing about a Bureau of Vital Statistics and a footprint on a birth certificate, and fingerprints being used, biometrics, as a carbon footprint, and or including, and or, the idea of absentee voting. The thing with this is that song by Hillsong, Ocean's Deep, where feet may fail, seem to be the issue of biometrics, and really even more so the humerus bone. And it seemed to be the spore stone that is used in orthopedic surgery to replace damaged or missing bone, and which seems to be now, over years of thinking about everything involved, it's obviously been some idea of a forecast of We International and selective service thing about, I mean, even the hood ornament, where it really matters most in relation, and involving some idea, it seemed to be the FDIC thing. I was like, you got to be kidding me, a vice president network manufacturing some guy's link between his legs over an FDIC claim involving deed restrictions and performance monitoring. Some idea of liquidable equity is some idea of like an endorsing factor of like the sign of circumcision of presidents and governors manufacturing only what parental guidance only means to the PTA, or some idea as a method of banking, presenting, manufacturing some idea of what relation only means is community supervision, or relation between architecture and platform, between computer programming and language, involving some idea of McDonald's golden arches representing some idea of a great level of reputable standards of consensual participation in the form of embedding and encryption. I mean, over, some idea of electronic surveillance and a vice president network. Hopefully, what I'm talking about now, a StarGate program. Or, the thought that loss prevention is on the idea of making it way beyond like internet protocol of a local area network of maritime law and getting all amphibious and J. Edgar Hoover about, National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Yet it seemed to be the thing involving, Texas and Mexico Power being a part of like Wyatt Earp and John Wayne between some idea of the exclusionary rule provision of executive powers, sovereign immunities, and governmental amnesties, somewhere between like litigation de facto versus habeas corpus, and it seemed to be the only thing about monetary and domestic aggregates that presents only loss prevention as suppression of neighborhoods. And the only thing about getting beyond, method of banking seemed to be, the idea of like the note being legal tender for all debt, both public and private, has been the issue of whether settlements as compared to annuity, as compared to appreciation or depreciation, is the only idea of constitutional law, presenting, some idea of what state statutes annotated only means, and it seemed to be the only thing that really matters of the entire set. And I've seen it with the word volume and not with the word volume. But I mean, it's like a considerable amount of books of state statutes annotated, but it seemed to be the one word repudiation of warehousing all the way to real estate that links, you know, the idea of deed restriction in television programming as jurisprudence with the black back, identifying, you know, pastel green and I like the Sprite in you, a province, likewise international citizenship, and on par stuff about, you know, some idea of, you know, Ulysses S. Grant on 2 9-hole golf courses, presenting the issue like a still loan combined with a Pell Grant, or appreciation and depreciation, or loss prevention and suppression as maybe it's really not the issue of like annuity on the annuity side of like, you know, obstruction of justice. I mean, ultimately, it's seen to be the considerable amount of this information. I mean, it's just a never-ending, ongoing situation. I mean, not one word from anyone to this day is acknowledging anything other than, you know, getting the idea of international citizenship. It's like the idea of like legal tender for all that, both public and private, being the idea of like YouTube's the only thing to seem to be the only thing to do, being on supplemental security income, and like managing some idea of like making it very beyond a method of banking as investment terminology of human capital on the expenditure side, and, you know, getting up about, you know, a commercial venue, a living quarter, not affected by television programming or deed restriction, or continually, you know, issues seeming the auditing and legal media. It's like, you know, where's the compliment at? I mean, does it ever happen in this immediate area with like a normal day, or having, you know, anything other than a perception of, you know, some idea of like, you know, is there like going to be any real participation that's productive, that this doesn't present some negative idea based on, you know, the way it seems to be in my perception of anything other than some Roe v. Wade issue, or a contesting factor of loss prevention as like someone is like designated driver is projected as not going to leave the bank based upon a precedent and governor defining the meaning of only what parental guidance means as a PG-13 rating, or, you know, some idea of like a obstruction of justice is some idea of McDonald's golden arches at degree level, or reputable standards of consensual participation in one cycle of frequency identified as Latin America at a whim and notion in Pearland, Texas. It's like a carbon footprint and absentee voting, and I mean, even knowing and not knowing, it seems to be, you know, sometimes presenting the same, you know, idea of what result only means based upon an economic factor of only what seems to be manufactured is only what availability means. And that's why I'm referring to like, hey, Accra, you know, I mean, if there's going to be some idea of like healing, or, you know, some idea of overcoming some idea of boundaries and limitations over the mere sake of like a method of holding as a boycott and embargo, or some idea of clearance only based upon signal strength, or getting amphibious beyond like maritime law of internet protocol of local area network, and getting all national aeronautics and aviation about, you know, spaceship administration, and, you know, getting up about a commercial venue and some, you know, some idea about a Hill HX-50, you know, horizontally propelled aircraft, and, you know, a whole bunch of a building of like on the annuitized side of like, you know, appreciation and not such a contesting factor, just turning K television on, identifying some idea of a deed restriction based upon performance monitoring, or contesting factors like, you know, like while I'm not looking, you know, like what access is obviously been an issue of, and it seemed to be the only thing about, you know, confronting the issue would only be maybe making a decision. It's the way it's designed, is like making a decision is not necessarily the right thing to do. Why isn't it? So, you know, another reason why I'm on YouTube, but, you know, in any case, so I'm like really trying to find some like, you know, something really good other than maybe some idea of access resulting in me in a sin in my own home, or what air quality is meant, or some idea of we international presenting some idea of like a SOX compliance in the form of like, you know, some color code in between, you know, like a Sarbanes and Oxley, financial incidents and SOX compliance, and seemingly some color code between Chicago White Sox and the Boston Red Sox. Any case, like, I'm going to take a break. It's already going on like an hour and 24 minutes and, wow, 38 seconds. So I think I'm just going to stop right there and take a break. Yeah. Anyway, there it is, okay?